please introduce yourself to the audience, spelling your last name for the record?
Hi, my name is Will Warihay. I am a coach at Georgia Tech, and I've been a member of the board of directors since 2012. I've also been the tournament administration committee chair since 2011-2012.
What is the tournament administration committee?
We are essentially responsible for all of AMTA's tournaments. I'm in charge of 4 subcommittees that are responsible for assigning AMTA reps, picking sites where the tournaments are going to be held, and then assigning teams to those sites.
You mentioned 3 different functions. I want to focus on the last of those. When we talk about team assignments, what does that mean?
So that means we try to look at all 25 sites that we have in any given year, and after registration closes, we look at what teams we have. And we start from scratch every single year by assigning teams to each site to try to make each site as even as possible.
You said we. Who's part of this group?
So the committee is currently 5 board members. They're made up of coaches, volunteers, and people just with good experience in trying to make tournaments even.
Are those 25 sites regional sites, ORCS sites?
25 regional sites. We have 8 ORCS sites, opening round championship series, and then obviously the national championship at the end.
And can you give us a timeline of that team assignment process?
Well, we start picking sites, actual locations for our tournament in June, and we'll approve a list of tournaments in July, and then once registration closes, or the initial registration closes in October, we start with assigning the teams that meet the priority registration deadline. The final registration deadline is January 15th. So we have about a 3-month period there where we're assigning teams as they register, and then after January 15th passes, we have about, we're adding teams at the end there, but we release our regional assignments in November.
What's a priority registration?
Priority registration means if you register by that deadline, you are guaranteed a spot in a regional, up to 3 teams per school. If you register 4 teams, your D team or E team, if you have 5 teams, is initially placed on the wait list. However, since AMTA has instituted that rule, we've never not placed a team.
Sounds like you guys are doing a great job. Now, which teams get assigned?
Every team gets assigned. We start from scratch. Obviously, we have our hosts. They start by being assigned to their own tournament, and we start at I'll say at the top. We use TPR, or the team power ranking, which is AMTA's measure of how strong a team is, and we start by dividing out those teams amongst the regionals, and we go down from there.
I want to focus for a minute on that TPR, the team power ranking. How is that determined?
TPR is calculated by your results for the past 3 seasons at either opening round championship series or the national championship tournament, or both. And it's a measure of how strong your program is. It's obviously not the be-all, end-all. It is simply a measure of your historical performance, but it's not necessarily mean what you're going to do in the future. So it is something we look at, but it's certainly not the sole measure.
When my team gets to a regional tournament, does my schedule depend, does the teams I play depend on what my team power ranking is?
Absolutely not. Every single tournament, round 1 is randomly drawn at every single level. That has no impact on your pairings or your schedule.
Does AMTA tell the judges the ranking of the teams in a particular round?
Absolutely not.
Okay. So when you're trying to assign the teams to the various regional sites, what does your committee look at?
We look at geography. We obviously look at the power of the teams and how far we're going to ask teams to travel. We want to make sure that we assign teams as close as possible, taking into account scheduling conflicts, date conflicts. If teams, say, have 4 teams and they can't compete on the same weekend, then they have to go to tournaments on 2 separate weekends, and then we have to look at whether or not we have tournaments that are geographically close, yet on different weekends to send those teams to. If you're prepping for the LSAT, it is probably one of the most complicated logic games you've ever looked at.
What's the biggest challenge that your committee faces when doing the team assignments?
It's probably the date conflicts and separating out multiple teams and making sure teams stay as close as possible. We want to make sure that teams do not have to travel far. Sometimes that's unavoidable. We also want to focus on making sure tournaments are as even as possible. And sometimes those 2 things come into conflict, and as a result you'll see some teams traveling really far for a regional. For example, a few years ago, we sent Harvard down to Orlando, Florida. We would never ask a school or any team to go that far without talking to them first. And so when we do that, if we do that, we would reach out to that school and say, we're considering sending you to a tournament that is some distance away. We wouldn't tell them which tournament we're going to send them to, and make sure that that's okay, that they have the means to get there. We never let a team region shop or try to game the system by doing that for us. But we want to make sure that we take into account any date conflicts while making sure that everyone kind of has as even a playing field as possible to make it out of a regional and into an ORC.
To what extent, when you're assigning teams to regionals, do you think about the balance of power at ORCS?
So we start by, at the initial stage in October, we will preliminarily assign regionals to an ORC. So for example, we'll say that Boston is going to feed to State College, Pennsylvania. When we start assigning teams to those regionals, we may adjust some of those team feeders, and we will look at initially the expected teams to move on and how that would create an ORC and to what extent that ORC would be balanced with the other ORCs across the country. Obviously, to some extent, those regionals to ORCs are purely geography based. So we certainly wouldn't send a regional in Claremont, California to an ORC in Memphis, Tennessee. But if we have maneuverability there, we will try to shift some of those around. Most of the time that happens in the Northeast because everyone's kind of so close together up there. Elsewhere in the country, it pretty much does itself.
So when the initial set of team assignments come out, you said that's in November?
Correct, right around Thanksgiving.
So when they come out and students and teams look at the assignments, if they don't like their assignment, or if there's a problem with their assignment, a conflict with their assignment, what should they do?
So they can write to me, to the Tournament Administration Committee Chair, to whoever that is at the time, and explain what their issue is. As I said earlier, we don't let teams region shop. And so it is much better if you have a schedule conflict to tell AMTA about that before the regional assignments come out. Obviously, the best time to tell us is just on your school registration form when you fill that out and sign up with us for the first time. If something comes up later, we understand that that happens. You just need to tell us about it as soon as possible. After the assignments come out and all of a sudden you don't want to go to that regional because a team that's really good is going to your regional, that doesn't really look good for us because we're expecting that you're trying to region shop and get somewhere else easier. So you probably need to have a really good explanation as to why you didn't know about the schedule conflict that you're telling me about earlier in the year.